This is Beyond the Business.
If the atmosphere is the invisible layer surrounding the global economy, cities are the places where that relationship becomes most concentrated. More than half of the world's population now lives in urban areas. According to the United Nations, by 2050, nearly 70% of humanity will live in cities. Urban regions concentrate infrastructure, transportation networks, industry, and energy consumption with the relatively small geographic spaces. Millions of vehicles move through streets every day. Power plants generate electricity for dense clusters of buildings. Ports receive cargo from global shipping routes. Airports connect metropolitan regions with the international aviation networks. All of these systems operate within the same layer of air. The atmosphere above the city is not simply empty space between buildings. It is a constantly moving mixture of emissions, particle, gases, and heat produced by urban activity. Every human being takes roughly 20,000 breaths every day. In cities, most of those breaths pass through an atmosphere shaped by traffic, industry, energy production, and global trade. According to the World Health Organization, around 99% of the world's population now lives in places where air quality exceeds recommended pollution limits. Air pollution is estimated to contribute to around 7 million premature deaths every year, make it one of the largest environmental health risks on the planet. Urban air reflects the structure of the city itself. The way streets are designed influences how air circulates between buildings. The location of industrial zones determines where emissions enter the atmosphere. Ports, airports, and highways introduced additional layers of transport related pollution. Even the geography surrounding a city can influence how air behaves. Cities located in valleys or surrounded by mountains may trap pollution for long periods of time. Coastal cities often benefit from sea winds that disperse emissions more quickly. In other words, every city creates its own atmospheric environment. Understanding that environment requires looking at several layers of the urban system: the physical structure of the city, the industrial infrastructure surrounded, the transportation systems that keep it moving, and the regulatory systems that attempt to control the impact of all these forces on human health. One of the most important features of urban air is the way buildings interact with the atmospheric circulation. In dense cities, tall buildings form what researchers often call urban canyons. Streets lined with high structures create narrow corridors through which air moves more slowly than it would across open landscapes. Instead of disappearing freely, pollutants can remain trapped between buildings. In central London, pollution measurements taken at street level often show concentrations of nitrogen dioxide 2 to 3 times higher than readings taken only a few meters above rooftop level. The buildings themselves alter the movement of air. Wind slows down between structures, turbulence increases, and emissions from traffic accumulate in the lower layers of the street environment. Cities such as New York, Hong Kong, and Tokyo experience similar effects. High rise architecture can create complex wind patterns that trap pollution at street level before atmospheric currents eventually disperse it. Temperature also plays a role. Cities tend to be warmer than surrounding rural areas, a phenomenon known as the urban heat island effect. Concrete, asphalt, and glass surfaces absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, altering local air circulation patterns. Under certain conditions, these patterns can create stagnant air layers that prevent pollutants from dispersing. Some cities experience these effects dramatically. One of the most striking examples is Delhi. During winter months, the city regularly experiences extreme pollution episodes. Concentrations of PM 2.5 particles often reach 300 to 500 micrograms per cubic meter. For comparison, the World Health Organization guideline is just 5 micrograms per cubic meter. This means that during severe smoke episodes, daily air can exceed recommended safety levels by more than 50 times. Schools have occasionally been closed due to dangerous air conditions. Millions of residents rely on air purifiers inside their homes. Visibility can drop dramatically as a thick haze settles over the city. The pollution does not come from a single source. Vehicle emissions, industrial activity, construction dust, and agricultural burning in surrounding regions all contribute to the atmospheric mixture above the city. Urban air quality is rarely determined by one factor alone. It emerges from the interaction between city design, transportation systems, industrial activity, and regional geography. Before we move deeper into the system that shape urban air, it helps to step back for a moment and look at a few numbers that reveal the scale of the phenomenon. First, humans breathe far more often than most people realize. An average adult takes roughly 20,000 breaths every day. Over the course of a lifetime, that becomes more than 600 million breaths passing through the lungs. In cities, most of these breaths pass through air shaped by engines, industry, and urban infrastructure. Second, according to the World Health Organization, 99% of the global population now lives in areas where air pollution exceeds recommended safety limits. In other words, clean urban air has become the exception rather than the norm. Third, air pollution is responsible for approximately 7 million premature deaths every year worldwide. That makes it one of the largest environmental health risks on the planet, comparable to major global diseases. Fourth, fine particulate matter, known as PM 2.5, is so small that around 30 of these particles could fit across the width of a human hair. Because of their microscopic size, they can travel deep into the lungs and even enter the bloodstream. Fifth, some of the largest urban pollution episodes occur not only because of emissions, but because of weather conditions. When atmospheric layers become stable and winds weaken, pollution can accumulate rapidly. Under these conditions, cities can experience what scientists call temperature inversions, where polluted air becomes trapped near the ground. Sixth, modern cities are also significant sources of heat. Large urban areas can be 2 to 5 degrees Celsius warmer than surrounding rural regions due to the urban heat islands effect, created by concrete, asphalt, and dense infrastructure. This temperature difference can influence how pollution moves and disperses above the city. Seventh, despite the scale of the problem, improvements are possible. Over the past several decades, many cities have successfully reduced certain pollutants through cleaner fuels, vehicle emission standards, and industrial regulations. For example, average particulate pollution levels in Beijing fell by roughly 35 to 40% between 2013 and 2020 after aggressive clean air policies were introduced. These numbers reveal an important reality. Urban air is not simply a local environmental issue. It is a global system shaped by the structure of modern cities, the technologies that power them, and the economic networks that connect them. In many cities, the largest sources of air pollution are not located in the city center but in the industrial infrastructure surrounding. Ports provide one of the clearest examples. Modern port complexes function as enormous logistical hubs where global trade meets urban environments. Container terminals, oil refineries, petrochemical facilities, and storage depots often operate side by side with densely populated metropolitan areas. The port of Rotterdam, the largest port in Europe, handles more than 14 million containers each year, while also hosting one of the largest petrochemical clusters in the world. Tankers arrive carrying crude oil from global producers. Refinery process the oil into fuels and industrial chemicals. Chemical plants transform raw materials into plastics and synthetic materials used throughout the global economy. All of these activities interact with the atmosphere simultaneously. Ships burn fuel as they approach port facilities, refineries release gases as part of industrial processing, trucks and trains distribute cargo through regional transportation networks. The result is a complex mixture of emissions entering the air above the metropolitan region. Another example can be found in Southern California. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach together form the busiest container gateway in the United States. At peak periods, they handle over 40% of all containerized imports entering the country. For decades, communities located near the port experienced elevated levels of air pollution caused by ship emissions, diesel trucks, and cargo handling equipment. In response, authorities introduced the Clean Air Action Plan, which required cleaner marine fuels, electrification of cargo equipment, and the use of shoreside electrical power, allowing ships to shut down engines while docked. These initiatives significantly reduced certain types of emissions in the region. Ports illustrate how global logistics systems interact directly with the urban air. A container arriving from Asia may pass through several layers of atmospheric impact before reaching a consumer. Ship emissions at sea, port operations at the terminal, diesel trucks transporting goods through the city, and distribution centers moving cargo further inland. Urban air becomes a mixture not only of local activity but also of a global trade. While industry and ports contribute significantly to urban air conditions, transportation systems often represent the most immediate source of pollution inside the cities. Cars, buses, trucks, motorcycles operate continuously across urban road networks. Each engine converts fuel into motion and releases exhaust gases into the surrounding air. In many metropolitan areas, transportation emissions account for 30 to 40% of nitrogen dioxide pollution measured in urban environment. Pollution levels often peak during morning and evening rush hours when millions of engines operate simultaneously. Historically, some cities have struggled severely with this problem. One of the most famous examples in Los Angeles. During the 1950s and 1960s, the city experienced intense smog episodes caused primarily by car emissions interacting with the sunlight and atmospheric chemistry. At times, a thick brown haze covered the skyline for large parts of the year. These conditions eventually led to some of the earliest vehicle emission regulations in the United States. Another dramatic example is Beijing. During the early 2010, the Chinese capital became internationally known for extreme smoke conditions. PM 2.5 concentrations frequently exceeded 400 micrograms per cubic meter, creating hazardous air conditions. Beginning in 2013, the Chinese government launched an aggressive clean air campaign. Coal fired power plants near the city were closed or relocated. Heavy industries were moved away from the metropolitan region. Vehicle registration systems limited the number of new cars entering the city each year. Within several years, average particulate pollution levels at Beijing fell by approximately 35 to 40%. These examples show that urban air is deeply connected to how cities move. Every vehicle, aircraft, and ship becomes part of the atmospheric system surrounding the city. Air pollution is not only an environmental issue, it is also a major public health concern. Long term exposure has been linked to respiratory diseases, cardiovascular conditions, and reduced life expectancy. According to the World Health Organization, millions of premature deaths each year are associated with the air pollution. One of the most dramatic historical examples occurred in London in December 1952. A combination of cold weather, stagnant air, and heavy coal burning created a dense layer of pollution that settled over the city for several days. Visibility dropped to just a few meters. Public transportation slowed almost to a halt. People walking through the streets often could not see more than a few steps ahead. Hospitals quickly filled with the patients suffering from respiratory distress. Later studies estimated that the event contributed to around 12,000 deaths, making it one of the deadliest air pollution disasters in the modern history. The catastrophe eventually led to the Clean Air Act of 1956, one of the first major legislative efforts to regulate urban air pollution. Today, air quality monitoring networks operate in cities around the world. Sensors measure pollutant concentrations in real time. Satellite systems track atmospheric patterns across continents. Governments publish daily air quality indexes to inform residents about pollution conditions. Despite these advances, managing urban air remains a complex challenge. Cities continue to grow, transportation networks expand, industrial production increases to support global economic demand. Balancing these forces with the need to maintain healthy air requires continuous innovation in technology, policy, and urban planning. Cities are among the most visible achievements of human civilization. They concentrate culture, innovation, infrastructure, and economic activity into dense landscapes of buildings, roads, and energy systems. Yet above every skyline lies another landscape, an invisible atmosphere shaped by the systems operating below it. The air above cities carries the imprint of transportation network, industrial production, global shipping, and energy consumption. It records how cities move, how they produce, and how they interact with the wider global economy. Understanding urban air, therefore, means understanding the relationship between modern civilization and the atmosphere that surrounds it. Because while buildings define the visible skyline of a city, the invisible atmosphere above it reveals how that city truly functions. And once we begin to see that invisible system more clearly, the structure of urban life begins to look very different.